One man, with a tourist visa, a pair of binoculars, and a bag of papayas, walked circles around the entire United States military intelligence apparatus and made Pentagon create the CIA. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how he did it. Every step and every moment where America had him in its sights and looked the other way. And you will know how his masterpiece of low-tech, no-budget, completely audacious spycraft so humiliated the US government that they had no choice but to build an entirely new kind of intelligence agency from the wreckage. It is spring 1941. A young Japanese man steps off a boat in Honolulu Harbor. His papers say his name is Tadashi Morimura. His papers say he is a junior diplomat, newly assigned to the Japanese consulate in Honolulu. His papers are impeccably forged and completely convincing. He is 27 years old, well-dressed, handsome in a loose, unhurried kind of way. And within approximately 48 hours of arrival, he has found a bar stool and made himself comfortable on it. Over the next several months, the Americans who notice him, and some do, notice a man who is aggressively, almost professionally unimpressive. He drinks, he flirts, he takes long drives around the island. He goes on hikes, he sits on restaurant terraces staring at the ocean. He visits the same tea house so often the staff know his order. He is, by every observable measure, a young diplomat with too much free time and a fondness for local scenery. What he actually is the most dangerous spy in the Pacific. Takeo Yoshikawa was not a diplomat. He was a Japanese naval intelligence officer trained specifically for this assignment, carrying one mission and one mission only. Map Pearl Harbor, count the ships, learn the patrol schedules, measure the depths, find the weaknesses, and get that information back to Tokyo before the strike fleet needed it.
He had no radio transmitter. He had no dedicated support network. He had no team of operatives, no safe houses, no elaborate tradecraft equipment. He had his eyes, his memory, his cover identity, and the single most powerful tool available to any intelligence officer in history, the ability to look like someone who wasn't worth watching. Now, let's talk about the man he was watching. On the other side of this story is Admiral Husband Kimmel, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Pacific Fleet. 96 ships, 8 battleships, roughly 400 aircraft, 40,000 men. The most powerful naval force America had ever assembled in the Pacific, sitting in what Kimmel considered an extremely defensible harbor. Kimmel was not a foolish man. He was thorough, experienced, and serious about his command. He ran drills, he filed readiness reports, he maintained his fleet in good order and believed, with genuine professional confidence, that Pearl Harbor was a hard target. What Kimmel did not know was that a Japanese naval intelligence officer was hiking up the hills above his harbor, counting the seconds it took his destroyers to complete a turn in the channel, and calculating their speeds from the timing. Kimmel was playing chess. Yoshikawa was watching him play chess from the window of the building across the street.
The FBI knew something was off with the Japanese consulate. Of course they did. This was 1941. Tensions with Japan were rising by the month, and counterintelligence agents were specifically assigned to watch the consulate staff. They followed Yoshikawa. They logged his movements. They noted his habits. And the habits they noted were drinking, tourism, socializing, apparent laziness, which was exactly what he wanted them to note.
Early in his assignment, Yoshikawa realized he was being followed. Most agents in that situation go tighter, become more careful, reduce activity. Yoshikawa did the opposite. He leaned into his cover so hard, it became armor. He started performing incompetence like a stage actor. If he was going to be watched, he would give them something boring to watch. He drank more visibly. He flirted more publicly. He played the role of the idle playboy diplomat so completely, so consistently, so convincingly that the FBI agents who spent months watching him eventually concluded, as trained professional counterintelligence officers, that this man was not worth their full attention. This is the first lesson of Yoshikawa's mission, and it is the most important one. The most effective camouflage isn't invisibility, it's boredom. Make yourself boring enough and you become invisible anyway. The Americans weren't looking for a drunk on a bar stool. They were looking for a spy. And Yoshikawa made absolutely certain those two things never looked like the same person. While the United States military was pouring resources into signals intelligence, cracking codes, intercepting diplomatic cables, running sophisticated cryptographic programs, one Japanese naval officer was defeating them all with what intelligence professionals later called open source intelligence, meaning information that is freely available to anyone who bothers to look. He didn't need secrets, he needed observation, and he was extraordinary at it.
The hikes up Aiea Heights are the part that should haunt every intelligence professional who has ever studied this case. Aiea Heights gives you an elevated view of Pearl Harbor. The harbor layout, the ship positions, the entry channels, all visible from the ridgeline. Yoshikawa hiked up there repeatedly, not to enjoy the view, to work. He would stand on the heights and time the movements of ships below. A destroyer exiting the channel, he counted the seconds. A battleship maneuvering into position, he noted the radius, the speed, the draft lines relative to the waterline. He was building, in his head and in careful notes later committed to memory, a precise operational picture of how the harbor functioned, which ships were where, when they moved, how quickly they could respond. He didn't need a photograph. He needed to understand the harbor as a living system, its rhythms, its patterns, its predictable regularities. Because bombers coming in from altitude need to know where ships will be, not just where they are. Then there was the Shunchiro Tea House. The Shunchiro was a Japanese-owned establishment in Honolulu. Yoshikawa became a regular. He had a favorite table on the balcony. The balcony had a clear, unobstructed view of Battleship Row, the section of Pearl Harbor where America's battleships were moored in a line so orderly, so regular, so tidily organized that from above they looked exactly like targets on a range. Yoshikawa would sit at his table, drink tea, and memorize. Not notes, not at first. He would simply look and remember and look again. The spacing between ships, the patterns of crew activity at different times of day, the positions of the anti-aircraft installations, the locations of the fuel depots.
Here is the thing that makes this so extraordinary. While Yoshikawa sat on that balcony memorizing the precise positions of America's Pacific Fleet, FBI counterintelligence agents were occasionally in the building below him, watching the exits, waiting for him to do something suspicious. He was doing something suspicious. He was doing the most significant act of pre-war intelligence gathering in Pacific history. And he was doing it while drinking tea on a balcony in plain sight, because nobody thought to look up. Now, the bag of fruit. At some point during his mission, the exact circumstances are debated by historians, but the core incident is documented. Yoshikawa found himself carrying sensitive materials while being tailed. Notes, sketches, the kind of thing that ends your mission and your freedom if the wrong person finds it in your pocket. He stopped at a roadside fruit stand. He bought a bag of papayas. He chatted with the vendor. He looked at the fruit. He moved slowly and casually, with the ease of a man whose only concern in life was whether the papayas were ripe. The FBI agents watching him saw exactly what he intended them to see. A man buying fruit. A tourist. A waste of their afternoon. The sensitive materials got where they needed to go. The papayas went home with a diplomat who probably didn't even like papayas. This is Yoshikawa's entire strategy compressed into one transaction. He understood something profound about how surveillance works. People see what they expect to see. The FBI expected to see a lazy playboy, so every time he was lazy and playboyish, he was confirming their assumption and buying himself space to work. The fruit stand wasn't an accident. It was a masterclass in making your enemy's expectations work for you.
The communication system he used to get information back to Tokyo is, if anything, even more elegant. He sent telegrams, routine-looking telegrams about things like silk prices, weather conditions, wind directions, completely unremarkable correspondence that passed through normal channels and attracted no particular scrutiny. They were, of course, coordinates. Silk prices high, wind from the northeast, translated through an agreed cipher into precise navigational and tactical information about ship positions and patrol patterns.
The WINS code, as it became known, let Yoshikawa transmit operational intelligence, while the American signals interceptors, who were watching Japanese communications closely enough to have cracked the diplomatic cipher, saw nothing but routine commercial messages. They were, to use a word that only became popular much later, hiding in plain sight. The entire Pearl Harbor intelligence operation ran on methods so low-tech, so deliberately mundane, that the American apparatus built to detect sophisticated espionage simply couldn't register it. But here is the moment that changes everything. The moment where Yoshikawa observes something so significant, so telling about American assumptions, that the attack plan locks into its final shape. Kimmel, in his thoroughness, had been worrying about sabotage. This was a reasonable concern in 1941. The idea that Japanese agents on the island might try to destroy aircraft on the ground, blow up fuel depots, that kind of thing. So he gave an order that made complete sense as a counter-sabotage measure. He had all aircraft parked wingtip to wingtip, tightly clustered, easy to guard, easy to watch. Any saboteur trying to slip in at night would be immediately visible.
Yoshikawa saw this arrangement from his elevated vantage points and understood its significance instantly. Kimmel had arranged his aircraft to stop a knife in the dark. He had accidentally arranged them for a hammer from the sky. Planes parked wingtip to wingtip cannot be scrambled quickly. They cannot be dispersed under fire. They are, from the perspective of a high-altitude bomber, a dense cluster of wooden and aluminum targets so tightly packed that a single bomb could take out multiple aircraft. What Kimmel had done to prevent sabotage had made his Air Force significantly more vulnerable to aerial attack. This went into Yoshikawa's reports. It went into the planning, and it became one of the reasons that on December 7th, the U.S. Army Air Forces at Hickam and Wheeler Fields lost nearly 200 aircraft in the first wave, most of them destroyed on the ground before a single one could get airborne. Every step Kimmel took to secure his base, Yoshikawa watched. Every measure Kimmel implemented, Yoshikawa calculated its blind spot. The man protecting the harbor and the man studying the harbor were in a chess match, except only one of them knew the game was being played.
December 7th, 1941, 7:48 a.m. 353 Japanese aircraft arrived over Pearl Harbor. They were flying coordinates that Takeo Yoshikawa had spent 8 months collecting from bar stools, tea house balconies, hilltop hikes, and a roadside fruit stand. They hit the ships on Battleship Row, the exact ships in the exact positions Yoshikawa had mapped, whose moorings he had memorized, whose movements he had timed. The USS Arizona detonated in 9 minutes. The USS Oklahoma capsized. The Nevada, the West Virginia, the California, all hit. All exactly where Yoshikawa's intelligence said they would be. The aircraft at Hickam and Wheeler Fields, parked in their neat, guarded, sabotage-proof clusters, were destroyed in the first wave before their pilots could reach them. 2,403 Americans were dead by 9:55 a.m. The most powerful naval force in the Pacific was in flames. And while the harbor burned, in an office in the Japanese consulate in Honolulu, Takeo Yoshikawa was at his fireplace.
He burned his sketches. He burned his notes. He burned the Tadashi Morimura identity, the cover documents, the diplomatic papers, everything that connected him to 8 months of intelligence work. By the time the FBI burst through the door, Yoshikawa was sitting in a clean office, next to a fireplace with recently warm ashes, and the serene composure of a man with absolutely nothing to hide. He was a diplomat. He had diplomatic immunity. There was nothing the FBI could do. He was eventually interned, then exchanged in a prisoner swap, and returned to Japan in 1942. He spent the rest of the war in obscurity. And here is the detail that completes the story. The United States government did not fully understand who Tadashi Morimura actually was until post-war interrogations in 1946. For years after Pearl Harbor, the man most responsible for the intelligence operation behind the attack was not a name on any American wanted list. He was just a ghost in a Hawaiian shirt who had bought some papayas and gone home.
If this is your first time here, this is what we do. The story behind the story. The name in the footnote who was actually running the show. Subscribe and hit the bell, because the next chapter always matters more than the one they teach you. Here is what the United States government was forced to confront in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor. One man, one Japanese naval intelligence officer, no radio transmitter, no support network, no team of operatives, a tourist visa, a good memory, a fondness for tea house balconies, and a working understanding of human psychology.
That man, operating alone with essentially no equipment, had gathered more actionable intelligence about Pearl Harbor than the entire United States Army and naval intelligence apparatus combined. While American codebreakers were cracking sophisticated diplomatic ciphers, Yoshikawa was sitting on a hill counting ships with his eyes. While the FBI was logging his bar tabs, he was memorizing the depth of the harbor channels. He didn't out-tech them, he outlooked them. And the question that this left sitting on Harry Truman's desk in 1945, after Roosevelt died, after the war ended, after the post-war interrogations revealed the full picture of what had happened, was not just how did we miss the attack? The question was, how do you build a system that could catch a Yoshikawa?
How do you build something that notices the man on the hilltop, that connects the silk price telegrams to the carrier fleet movements, that looks at a diplomat buying papayas and asks, what is he really doing? The answer, eventually, was the CIA. Not because the CIA was built specifically to catch low-tech open-source intelligence operations, but because Pearl Harbor, the full picture of Pearl Harbor, including Yoshikawa's role, made it undeniable that America needed a centralized body whose job was synthesis. Taking the radar report, the diplomatic intercept, the FBI surveillance log, the harbor depth chart, and the tea house booking record, and putting them in the same room, where someone whose job was to see the whole picture could see the whole picture. In 1947, Truman signed the National Security Act. The CIA was born. Built, in the end, not from ambition, not from Cold War paranoia, but from the specific, documented, embarrassing proof that one man with a tourist visa and a bag of papayas had outplayed the entire American intelligence apparatus for 8 months in plain sight. There were 3 things Yoshikawa proved that the United States military had to learn the hard way.
First, the most dangerous intelligence operation is the one you can't see, because you're not looking for it. America was watching for saboteurs, for code transmitters, for clandestine meetings in the dark. It was not watching for a man on a hilltop with good eyesight and patience. Second, assumption is the enemy of security. Kimmel assumed Pearl Harbor was defensible. The FBI assumed Yoshikawa was incompetent. Every assumption they made was exactly the assumption Yoshikawa needed them to make. He didn't defeat American intelligence. He weaponized American assumptions against them. Third, and this is the one that became the CIA's founding logic, information only protects you if it reaches the right person at the right time. The radar operator saw the planes. The codebreaker saw the diplomatic signals. The FBI watched Yoshikawa for months. The information existed. It just never assembled into a picture. And Yoshikawa was counting on exactly that. He won because America had watchers, but no connectors. Collectors, but no synthesizers. People who held pieces, but no one whose job was the puzzle. The CIA was built to be the person whose job was the puzzle. And in the quiet aftermath of the most consequential act of solo spycraft in American history, that is the legacy of a man who was never on a wanted list, never appeared in a headline, and once successfully evaded the FBI by buying fruit. Takeo Yoshikawa won, completely, cleanly, quietly. And everything America built afterward was an attempt to make sure he could never win again. See you in the next video.